Hello and welcome to our presentation on bridging the general communication gap. Together, Anne Marie Higgins, Chris Allen, and I will look at two case scenarios. We will analyze and discuss what the communication roadblocks are in each case and how to improve communication. Our first case study, Scenario 1, begins with Mark, a Generation Y employee who'd been there approximately 6 months with the company, deciding to go down to a social event. He grabbed his phone and proceeded downstairs and seated himself at a table with a group of older managers where Kent was telling about his early days with the company. While Mark was listening to everything Kent said, he was also texting his friends. Kent noticed this and obviously felt insulted and got up and said that he must be boring Mark and left the table. Mark proceeds upstairs to return to his office when Maria, a baby boomer herself, approached him and briefly tells Mark that if he wants to make a good impression on the managers, that he should put his cell phone away. Mark texts several of his friends to ask their opinion as to why the managers were upset with him. His younger friends agreed and told him not to worry about it, but one of his older friends, Sam, replied back and explained to Mark that there was different communication styles within each generation and explained to Mark that he needed to watch the older generation, all generations for that matter, and learn the different techniques that can be used so that he would be understood and also understand other managers. The second case study, Scenario 2, has to do with Whitney, who is a new manager, head of the marketing promotions department for a company. She's worked there approximately 6 months and has made several changes having to do with how the group interacted. She has instituted texting, blogging, and a number of other ways. Everyone in the company seemed to embrace the changes except for Brett, who was a baby boomer and ready to retire. He had an issue with some of these things and just did not embrace them. The previous manager had told Whitney that he had great ideas and was a good employee, so she was a bit puzzled to his resistance. Brett refused to participate in any texting or blogging, did not reply back to anything that Whitney sent out, and Whitney did not know how to address this and wondered why Brett was not living up to his past manager's evaluation. Sadly, Brett's talents go unused because of Whitney not understanding how to draw Brett into it, whether it be through training or adjusting how he would communicate with the group. To understand the barriers in Scenario 1, we must begin by understanding the differences in communication styles between the different generations. The seniors, the ones that are ready to retire, the older workers, who are the baby boomers, and the younger workers, the Generation Y, and lastly, the middle-aged workers, who are considered Generation X. They all communicate differently and have been raised with different forms and levels of communication through technology. Kent and Maria, both older, they see texting as rude and being disrespectful while in a group environment. Mark, a younger person, thought that texting was not only okay while he listened to Kent, but thought that it was a good thing because multitasking in his mind was efficient and acceptable. Neither side trying to understand or embrace the other's communication style leads to problems. As you can see by the pictures below, the older lady holding a sign saying, "Say no to technology," very resistant, while the younger gentleman is texting and smiling and has been raised in a world where that is all acceptable and moving at a very fast pace. Barriers for Scenario 2 basically are the same as previous scenario one as far as the differences in communication styles between the generations. Whitney, the new head of marketing, is full of fresh ideas and does not understand, like the past manager, how to reach Brett and tap into his great ideas. Brett, not seeming willing to learn or embrace the new forms of communication such as texting or blogging, is now having his resources and talents go unused. So who is at fault? Well, let's look at scenario one. In this case, I believe it's more a lack of understanding that is the root cause. Brett does not understand why the baby boomers are upset about his texting. He thought that that was an acceptable thing to do. The older generation, Kent and Maria, they are not understanding why he would even think that this was acceptable. But Generation Y have grown up in a different generation where the use of constant, short, rapid bursts using multiple means of communication is the norm. So there's definitely just a lack of communication on both of their sides there that needs to be bridged. For scenario two, Whitney, being the manager, I believe, does hold some responsibility and needs to be addressing the issue with Brett instead of just wondering why he's not living up to his previous manager's evaluation. It's up to her as the manager to find a way to bridge the communication gap so that Brett is part of the team and can contribute his great ideas for the betterment of the company.
Did gender, age, or both play a role in Mark and Kent's miscommunication? I don't think gender had anything to do with it. You know, male, male to male, female to female, or whatever interaction. In this case, I don't think it had any precedence as far as the gender in their communication. I think this mishap could happen amongst to any interaction between any people. But I do believe that age played a factor as far as, you know, the generational gap in the communication and how the older generation would definitely and could find it rude that, you know, us younger kids were on our phones while we're trying to talk to them, and it leads them to feel as though we're not paying attention, or that they don't, or that we don't care what they're talking about. And this can provide a big issue and a miscommunication between the generations. I think that Mark needs to take the time to learn who he's talking to, learn the generation he's talking to, and figure out, you know, is that person, you know, all up on the technology, and do they do the same thing, or are they somebody who really requires my attention to pay to them? And I think that, you know, it's not just necessarily age. I'm a younger person, and I find it rude myself if I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody and they don't bother to pay attention to what I'm saying because they're on their phones or Snapchat or whatever there is on social media, and it can be very rude in the workplace. And so I find it that you need to be very professional in the fact that they deserve your attention and your respect, and you should give that to them and get off your phone no matter what your generation is.
How can Mark, Kent, Whitney, and Brett improve their communication skills? First of all, in both scenarios, they can all improve their communication skills by listening rather than talking, being active listeners who are attentive and concentrating on listening to what others are saying. They can also be more open-minded, no stereotyping, be authentic, and also concentrate on listening by avoiding being distracted by unnecessary distractions. And developing empathy, thinking about the situation of others, and be careful not to judge, accept others for their differences. They all need to focus on themselves by improving their listening skills and working together to build the communication bridge. In closing, this quote by Tony Robbins: "To effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others." In both scenarios we explored, they could have all benefited by following this guiding principle, by taking responsibility for their own communication, being good listeners, open-minded, and accepting others. In our own personal business and personal lives, we can learn from these individuals and begin to apply these good communication habits in our day-to-day lives to become better listeners and communicators to build successful relationships.